Ancient Greek philosophers literacy check. Greek philosophy. During the height of the ancient Greek civilization, a bold group of intellectuals set out on a new movement. In a society focused on the worship of gods like Zeus and Poseidon, men like Socrates and Plato began to question the beliefs of their neighbors and friends. This call, using reason rather than tradition as the means of knowing, caused a seismic shift in the way that the Western world thought. From the city state of Athens to the modern day, Greek philosophy has been a powerful force on the minds of Western thinkers. What is philosophy? Philosophy is a Greek term that means lover of wisdom. A philosopher is a man or a woman who seeks out truth. Philosophers try to approach life's great questions like what is the meaning of life and where does true knowledge come from? When approaching these questions, philosophers use reason to logically answer a question. While some philosophers saw happiness as the goal of life, like Aristotle, and other philosophers saw union with God as the goal, like St. Augustine, all philosophers seek truth by using reason. The motivation of philosophy is explained well in the famous quote from Socrates: "The unexamined life is not worth living." The first philosophers were called sophists in Greek society, and most were teachers. Sophists passed down the traditional beliefs of the Greek gods while also teaching reading and public speaking. Much of the foundational practices of philosophy were due to the great works of Socrates in Athens. Born around 469 BCE, Socrates used a method of questioning in order to push his students to take learning into their own hands. Instead of answering student questions directly, he asked them pointed questions in hopes of leading them to greater knowledge. This method was called the Socratic method. Plato and Aristotle continued the work of Socrates. Plato wrote books about much of what Socrates taught him and even started the philosophical school in Athens, called Plato's Academy. Aristotle later did the same by starting a rival school called the Lyceum. Greek philosophers wrote books on enlightening the mind by reason and treatises on the importance of good education. They tutored great kings and leaders, teaching them to live with virtue and courage. They answered great questions about religion, government, and relationships. Plato's book, The Republic, still serves as one of the greatest written works for answering the question of how to make a just society that flourishes. Although the big three philosophers serve as the foundation, Greek philosophy did not stop with the death of Aristotle. Large schools of philosophy developed with different focuses and goals. These schools of philosophy were studied and advanced throughout the Roman Empire, Europe, and Africa in the Middle Ages, and during the Renaissance period. Religions like Christianity and Islam used many ideas from philosophers to illustrate their beliefs, and the building of great universities and libraries ensured that deep reflection would always be a part of education. Some examples of the great schools of philosophy started by Greek philosophers include Platonism, where ideas came before matter, and all matter is a reflection of higher truth. Through dialogue and reason, the world can become a better, more ideal place. Aristotelianism. All things are made for a final purpose. It is essential to study and seek practical wisdom. Pythagoreanism. Math and numbers point to the true nature of the world. Stoicism. The development of self control and courage will enable one to overcome destructive emotions. Epicureanism. Happiness is found in pleasure that is restrained. Finding in the simple life of moderation is where true happiness lies. What is this passage mainly about? A. Introducing readers to the basic practice and thinking of Greek philosophers. B. The writing style of the main Greek philosophers. C. How the Greek philosophers taught lessons. Or D, how Greek philosophy developed into five schools of thought. Which of the following statements is true? A, most Greek philosophers were from Corinth. B, philosophers valued reason over tradition. C, philosophers probably prefer giving answers more than asking questions. Or D, philosophers were big fans of the ancient Greek gods. Which of the following philosophers started a school? A, Socrates. B, Plato. C, Aristotle. D, none of them. E, both A and B, meaning both Socrates and Plato started a school. Or F, both B and C, meaning that both Plato and Aristotle began schools. Ancient Greek philosophy. The word philosophy means love of wisdom. Ancient Greek philosophy was characterized largely by reason and rational thought and laid the foundation for Western intellectual thinking. The Greek philosophers often challenged the status quo, and their ideas were not always welcome during their time. There are many famous Greek philosophers, including Democritus, who first proposed the existence of atoms, Xenophanes, who challenged the anthropomorphic depiction of the gods, and Epicurus, whose name is familiar to us from the modern word epicure, and whose philosophy of tranquility is nowadays interpreted as hedonism. But the most well known Greek philosophers are undoubtedly Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates never wrote down his thoughts. Rather, they have survived for us thanks to the written works of his students, Xenophon and Plato. Both wrote in the form of dialogue between Socrates and others, but their versions of events are not always compatible. Socrates was gifted with words. He was often accused of making the weaker argument stronger with the use of rhetorical devices, as well as of corrupting the youth of Athens. He was, however, apparently a man of virtue who was devoted to the truth, and his manner of engaging in dialogue using questions and answers to stimulate critical thinking, draw out ideas, and identify underlying presumptions is nowadays called the Socratic method. Plato, a student of Socrates, wrote some of the most fundamental texts of Greek philosophy, including the Republic, the Allegory of the Cave, the Symposium, and Apology, which recounts the trial, death penalty, and subsequent speech to the jury of Socrates before he was put to death. Aristotle, a student of Plato, studied with Plato for 20 years. Aristotle wrote treatises, not dialogue. His thoughts on ethics, politics, science, art, and metaphysics dominated Western thought for centuries after his death. Ancient Greek philosophy was characterized by A, not thinking about anything, B, just going with the status quo, the everyday normal. C, reason and thought. Or D, ignoring everything. The philosopher who first proposed the existence of atoms was A, Socrates, B, Democritus, C, Epicurus, or D, Xenophanes. The thoughts of Socrates were written down by A, Aristotle, B, Socrates, C, Xenophanes, or D, Plato. Plato wrote in the form of A, treatises, or B, dialogue. Who was a student of Socrates? Was Aristotle the student of Socrates or Plato the student of Socrates? Who was the student of Plato? Was Socrates the student of Plato or Aristotle, the student of Plato? Using dialogue or conversation to stimulate critical thinking is called A, the Socratic method, B, the Platonic method, or C, the Aristotelian method.